The first thing they noticed wasn't the prosthetic leg. It was the way the patient stopped screaming the moment she laid hands on him. The doctors had already written him off, lost cause, circling the drain. Someone barked at the disabled rookie nurse to get back, clear the space for people who knew what they were doing. Ava didn't argue. She never did. She just leaned in closer to check his airway. That's when the man on the gurney grabbed her wrist. Hard. The entire trauma bay went silent. His eyes found hers. Glassy, fading, but somehow certain. And through the blood pooling in his mouth, through the ragged hiss of a punctured lung, he whispered a name no one in that hospital had ever heard. Iron Widow. They told me you were dead. The air left Ava's lungs all at once. No one had called her that in years. Not since Afghanistan. Not since the mission that took her leg and saved her commander's life. Then the ER windows started to rattle. Engines, but not ambulances. 4 black Navy SUVs rolled into the emergency bay drive, slow and deliberate, and through the glass doors, a Navy SEAL admiral was already stepping out, asking for her by name. Before we begin, take 1 second to drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button. The first thing people noticed about Ava Hale wasn't the prosthetic leg. It was the way she moved, like it didn't matter. Seattle General's ER was already drowning when the ambulance bay doors exploded open and the night shattered into chaos. Paramedics screamed vitals over each other. A gurney crashed across tile, metal rattling like gunfire. The smell hit in waves. Antiseptic cut with rain and diesel fumes. Ava was halfway through restocking airway kits when the call tore through the department. Incoming trauma, critical, unstable. And the entire room snapped into that razor-sharp focus that only real emergencies create. She stepped aside as doctors thundered past, making herself small, invisible, exactly the way she'd learned to survive here. Rookie nurse, quiet, competent enough not to draw fire. Her badge read Ava Hale in blocky capital letters, and beneath it, the word that followed her everywhere, rookie, a label she'd stopped fighting the day they pinned it on her. The patient came in dying. Male, early 30s, multiple injuries, bleeding through the sheets faster than anyone wanted to admit. Someone barked the time. Someone else muttered, "Next bay," like they were already giving up. Ava watched his chest rise and fall, shallow, uneven, wrong, watched the monitor numbers lag behind what his body was already screaming. She felt it then, that familiar knot tightening behind her ribs, the one that came when the pieces didn't fit. "Clear the hall," Dr. Mercer snapped. The attending on duty, already gloved up, already moving. He didn't look at Ava when he said it. He never did. Ava slid closer anyway, hands steady as stone as she checked his airway. The patient made a sound, low, guttural, that surprised everyone in the room. Mercer's frown deepened. "He's not stable enough for you to be crowding the space," he said, still refusing to meet her eyes. "Step back." Ava didn't argue, never did. She leaned in 1 more inch. The man's eyes flew open. His hand shot up and locked around Ava's wrist. Not violent, not panicked, but deliberate. Blood smeared hot across her glove. The entire room went still, the way it does when the script breaks and no one knows what comes next. His gaze found hers, locked on, focused through the pain. "I know you," he rasped, each word clawing its way out. "They told us. You were gone." Mercer stepped forward, authority hardening his voice. "Sir, you need to let go." "Iron Widow," the man whispered. The words barely made it past his lips, but they hit the room like a gunshot in a library. "You're alive." Ava felt every molecule of air leave her lungs at once. No one else reacted. Not at first. The name was nothing to them. Just another stranger's delirium, another symptom to ignore. But Ava's heart slammed against her ribs like it had hit a wall at full speed. She gently pried his fingers loose and pressed 2 fingers to his neck, forcing herself back into the now, back into the work. "Pressure's dropping," someone called out. Ava looked up and met Mercer's eyes for the first time all shift. "He needs a second assessment," she said quietly. "Right side." Mercer's face flushed. "I said step back." Ava did. She stepped away, hands at her sides, watching. The monitor dipped lower. The patient's breathing shifted. Subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Ava was. She tracked the trachea, watched the skin. She knew what was coming before the machine started screaming about it. When the alarms finally caught up, the room detonated. Bag him! Now! Where the hell is respiratory? Get imaging up here! Move! Ava stayed exactly where she was, hands clasped, watching Mercer scramble to catch the problem she'd named 30 seconds too early for him to hear. The patient crashed hard, and the room turned frantic and sharp-edged. Orders collided mid-air. Someone knocked her shoulder and muttered a distracted apology that meant nothing. They pulled him back, barely. Just enough to keep him breathing, just enough to buy him 10 more minutes. Mercer exhaled hard, adrenaline curdling into anger. He rounded on Ava. You don't freelance in my trauma bay, he said, voice tight and low. You don't diagnose over my shoulder, and you sure as hell don't confuse dying patients by feeding into their delusions. Ava nodded once. Yes, doctor. He jabbed a finger toward the nurse's station. You're off this case. She went. Out in the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzed like insects. Ava leaned her weight carefully, adjusting the strap at her prosthetic knee where it always rubbed raw after long shifts. She rolled her ankle once, testing the connection. The ache was there, dull and familiar. Manageable, it always was. A junior nurse, Lena, caught up, eyes wide and uncertain. He said your name, she whispered like it was a secret. That was really weird. Ava gave her a small, practiced smile. People say all kinds of things. Lena hesitated, searching Ava's face. Are you okay? Ava glanced back through the glass doors at the trauma bay. The patient was still alive, for now. I'm still on shift, she said evenly. Where do you need me? The next hour dissolved into the usual controlled chaos. IVs threaded, charts updated, a belligerent drunk cursing at shadows, a kid with a fractured wrist trying not to cry. Ava moved through it all like water, quiet, constant, anticipating problems before they became emergencies. She didn't ask permission anymore. She'd learned she didn't need to. Then the building trembled. At first it felt like distant thunder, low, heavy, wrong. The windows rattled in their frames. Conversations died mid-sentence. Ava stopped, tilting her head just enough to listen. That vibration wasn't weather. Engines. Security radios erupted with static. We have vehicles entering the emergency drive. Unmarked. Repeat. Unmarked. The sound grew closer, heavier. Tires screamed. Doors slammed in perfect sequence. People drifted toward the windows despite themselves, drawn by instinct. Ava stayed put, finishing a line she'd started. Outside, 4 black SUVs rolled into formation like they'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. No lights, no visible plates. They stopped as one, precise as a heartbeat. A man stepped out of the lead vehicle, older, silver-haired, the kind of posture that didn't bend for anyone. His uniform was plain, almost unremarkable, but the way everyone around him moved told the real story. He scanned the entrance once, sharp and efficient, then walked inside without slowing down. Security tried to intercept. He didn't even blink. I need the nurse, he said, voice calm and absolute. Ava Hale. The entire lobby went silent. Mercer pushed through the crowd, indignation flaring hot. This is a hospital, he said, chest puffed. You can't just... The man looked at him. Mercer stopped talking. I'm here on Navy business, the man said, each word a period at the end of a sentence. And I don't have time. His eyes swept the room and found Ava. Didn't linger, just confirmed. Where is Iron Widow? He asked. Every single head turned. Ava felt it settle over her then. That old, familiar weight, the one she'd learned to carry, the one that never truly left. She finished taping off the IV, capped it, stripped off her gloves and dropped them neatly into the bin. Then she walked forward. Her prosthetic clicked softly against the tile, a sound that suddenly felt deafening. People moved aside without realizing they were doing it. The man watched her approach, his expression giving away nothing. Yes, Ava said, just that. No rank, no explanation. Behind her, Mercer found his voice again. She's a nurse, he said, like that explained everything. A rookie. The man didn't look back. Not tonight. Ava stopped at the threshold. Cool night air brushed her face, sharp and clean. She glanced once over her shoulder, at the ER, at the dying patient who'd recognized her, at the doctors who never had. Then she stepped outside to meet them, and the doors slid shut behind her. The doors sealed behind Ava with a soft pneumatic hiss, And just like that, the ER noise vanished, replaced by the low, controlled rumble of engines idling in formation. The night air bit cold and sharp, clean enough to sting her lungs. 4 black Navy SUVs sat in perfect alignment along the emergency drive, paint flat and matte, windows dark as slate, their presence impossible to ignore. No sirens, no flashing lights, just cold, calculated intention. Hospital security lingered at the edges, hands half raised, looking completely out of their depth. The man who'd asked for her, silver hair, ramrod spine, eyes like winter glass, stood beside the lead vehicle. Up close, Ava could see what the crowd inside had missed. The way armed personnel instinctively deferred to him without a word spoken. The way even trained soldiers gave him space. "Ava Hale," he said again. Not a question this time. Confirmation. "Yes." He studied her for a long beat. Not her face. Her posture? The prosthetic? The way she distributed her weight without thinking about it. "You're still on shift," he observed. "I am." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. "Then we'll make this quick." Behind them, the ER doors burst open again. Dr. Mercer pushed through, flanked by 2 administrators who looked like they'd been dragged from their beds. "This is completely unacceptable," Mercer said, voice razor thin. "You can't just remove staff without—" "I'm not removing anyone," the man replied, tone perfectly level. "I'm notifying you." He turned back to Ava. "We need you inside." Ava didn't move. "I already am." That earned her a sharper look. "Not like this." She followed his gaze. Across the drive, a 5th vehicle had arrived. Unmarked, civilian model, driver staying behind the wheel. Ava recognized the body language of the man in the passenger seat. Coiled, waiting, ready for a signal. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about her. "What happened?" she asked directly. The man's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "A system flagged your presence?" Mercer let out a sharp laugh. "She's a nurse." The man ignored him completely. "You were supposed to be gone," he said to Ava. "Buried deep enough that even bloodhounds couldn't pick up the scent?" Ava held his stare. "I did what I was supposed to do." "Yes," he said quietly. "That's exactly the problem." A ripple moved through the SUVs, doors opening in perfect synchronization. Men and women emerged, not in full tactical gear, but close enough to send a message. Their eyes tracked Ava with a familiarity that made the hair on her neck stand up. Recognition without curiosity, respect without ceremony. One of the administrators finally found her voice. "Who are you people?" The man turned slowly. "Admiral Ross, United States Navy." The words hit like a physical blow. Phones appeared, then disappeared back into pockets as people remembered too late that recording this might be a very bad idea. Ross gestured toward the ER entrance. "There's a patient inside who recognized you by a name that officially doesn't exist." Ava's throat went tight. He shouldn't have been able to. "He did," Ross said. And when he spoke it out loud, a dormant identifier activated. Mercer laughed again, sharp, disbelieving. "This is insane. She's been here 6 months. We ran full background checks." Ross looked at him again. Mercer stopped laughing. "You ran civilian checks," Ross said flatly. "Those came back clean because they were built to." Ava shifted her weight. The prosthetic clicked softly. "If this is about him," she said, nodding toward the hospital, "he needs medical care, not whatever this is." Ross nodded once. "He's stable, for the moment." "For the moment," Ava echoed, hearing the unspoken part. A radio crackled at Ross's shoulder. He listened, expression unchanging, then nodded once. "Bring it in." 2 of the SUVs moved forward, completely blocking the emergency drive. Security retreated another step. Inside the ER, the watching crowd pressed closer to the glass, whispers threading through the tension like smoke. Ross turned back to Ava. "Walk with me." They moved side by side toward the entrance. Mercer followed, sputtering objections nobody bothered to answer. Inside, the ER felt smaller somehow, tighter, like the walls had leaned in to eavesdrop. The patient lay sedated now, chest rising and falling mechanically. Ava felt the pull toward him, the unfinished thread still connecting them. Ross stopped a few feet from the bed. "He served with a unit that no longer exists on paper," Ross said quietly. "One you were attached to." Ava said nothing. He broke protocol tonight, Ross continued. Spoke a name he was supposed to have forgotten. That's his mistake. What concerns me is that he remembered you existed at all. Ava met his eyes dead on. Memory doesn't just disappear because you bury it in a file somewhere. Ross exhaled slowly through his nose. You always said that. Mercer snapped. You know her. Ross didn't look at him. I know what she did. The monitors beeped steadily in the background. Ava checked them out of reflex, noting the numbers. The slight drift she'd need to correct later if she got the chance. Ross watched her hands move. You lost your leg saving your commanding officer, he said, not asking. Ava's fingers paused for half a heartbeat. Then she finished adjusting the drip rate. I lost it saving a patient. Ross inclined his head slightly. Of course you did. Another radio call came through, this one tighter, more urgent. Ross turned away to listen, his spine straightening as the words filtered in. Ava caught fragments. Cross-reference, asset designation, secondary alert. When he turned back, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. There's been a breach, Ross said carefully. Not here, Ava frowned. Then why are you locking down my hospital? Because whatever triggered the system, Ross said, didn't stop with just you. The ER lights flickered. Once, just once, but enough to be noticed. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, an alarm started chirping. Short, insistent, wrong. A nurse's voice cut through, urgent. ICU needs immediate assistance. Ava didn't hesitate. She was already moving, pulling fresh gloves on as she went. Ross watched her go, then followed without a word. In the ICU, a patient was seizing, monitors screaming bloody murder. Ava assessed in seconds, barking calm, clear orders that cut straight through the rising panic. She was all focus now. The rest of the world narrowed down to airway, circulation, neural response. Ross stood back, silent, watching. He saw what the others had missed earlier, the speed of her clinical decisions, the way the entire room unconsciously aligned itself around her authority. They stabilized the patient. The seizure slowed, stuttered, stopped. The alarm quieted to a warning hum. Ava stepped back, breathing evenly. She stripped off the gloves. That wasn't coincidence, Ross said quietly. No, Ava agreed. It wasn't. Mercer stared at her, and for the first time all night, doubt cracked through his certainty. What the hell are you? Ava met his gaze without flinching. I'm the nurse on duty. Ross checked his watch. We're running out of time. For what? Ava asked. For the part where this stops being containable, Ross said. Right now, it's isolated. Soon it won't be. Ava glanced down the hallway toward the ER entrance. The SUVs were still there, engines purring, waiting like patient predators. If you came here to take me, she said, you're already too late. Ross's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I came here to give you a choice. The word hung in the air between them. Another alarm sounded, different this time, deeper, the kind that meant protocols nobody wanted to activate. The intercom crackled to life. All departments, stand by for further instruction. Ross's radio came alive again. He listened, then closed his eyes briefly. It's spreading, he said. Ava felt it then, that old familiar constriction in her chest, the moment right before everything goes sideways. Then stop wasting time standing around. Ross opened his eyes. We need you. Ava nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then get the hell out of my way. She turned back toward the ER, already moving with purpose. The staff parted instinctively now, finally understanding something they couldn't name. Ross watched her go, then spoke into his radio, voice low and final. Full operational readiness, he ordered, and keep those vehicles exactly where they are. Outside, the SUVs continued their patient idle, engines steady, waiting for whatever came next. And inside the hospital, buried systems began to wake up. The first thing that changed wasn't the noise. It was the weight of eyes on Ava's back. Not the usual annoyance she'd grown accustomed to. Not the casual dismissal of someone who'd shown up from nowhere with credentials nobody could verify. This was different. A hesitation that hung in the air like static before a storm. The ER remained its chaotic self. Monitors still beeped their urgent rhythms. Metal stretchers clattered across linoleum. Voices competed for attention in overlapping waves of medical jargon and human desperation. But now, there was something else. A fractional pause before anyone addressed her directly, as though the room itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she'd do next. Ava sensed it without needing to look. She finished scrubbing her hands with practiced efficiency, dried them on the rough paper towels, and stepped back onto the floor with the same calm she'd carried through worse. The patient who had whispered her name, her real name, lay sedated now, chest rising and falling in the artificial rhythm of the ventilator. Ava moved to his bedside with the quiet confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. She checked the ventilator settings first, then the IV pump. Her fingers made a subtle adjustment to the drip rate, the kind of change that seemed insignificant until you understood what it prevented. The numbers on the monitor steadied, stabilizing into a safer pattern. Behind her, Dr. Mercer lingered. He stood close enough to intervene, far enough to observe. He didn't speak. That alone told her everything had shifted. Admiral Ross occupied a position near the nurse's station, his mere presence creating an invisible boundary that people instinctively respected. No one crossed into his space without purpose. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. He silenced it without glancing down, his attention fixed elsewhere. Ava studied the patient's chart, her expression revealing nothing. "He needs imaging," she said, her voice steady and clinical. "Now." Mercer's mouth opened, then closed. He hesitated for a heartbeat, something he never would have done 12 hours ago, then nodded and gestured to a nearby resident. The younger doctor moved immediately, urgency replacing the usual hospital shuffle. That was the second change. People were listening now. As they wheeled the patient's bed toward radiology, Ava felt it stir inside her, the faint pull of memory she'd spent 7 years learning to suppress, the iron grip on her wrist, the name spoken through blood-flecked lips in a language most Americans didn't recognize. Iron Widow. She forced it back down into the dark place where she kept all the pieces of herself that didn't belong in this fluorescent world. She learned the hard way that looking backward in the middle of a crisis was how people ended up dead. A nurse approached, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "They're saying federal systems are running background checks on everyone," she said, anxiety threading through each word. "Like, all of us. Every staff member." Ava didn't react. "They'll stop." "How can you possibly know that?" "Because they already found what they came for." The nurse's throat worked as she swallowed hard, then she hurried away, shoulders tight. Ross stepped closer, his shoes making no sound on the polished floor. "You're drawing lines," he said quietly, his tone carrying a warning. "That can be dangerous." Ava kept her gaze fixed on the patient disappearing down the corridor. So is erasing people like they never existed? Ross studied her profile, reading what others would miss. "You disappeared on purpose." "Yes." "And now you're standing here, visible again." "Yes." Another beat of weighted silence. "You know why that matters." Ava finally turned to face him. "If this is about Afghanistan, you're 7 years too late." Ross's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "It's about what came after." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the ambulance bay, raised voices cutting through the controlled chaos, security radios crackling to life. Ava turned just as a man in a dark jacket forced his way through the gathered staff, flashing a badge too quickly for anyone to properly read it. "Department of," he started. Ross moved into his path with the economy of someone who'd done this before. "You're not cleared to be here." The man bristled, drawing himself up. "There's been an alert. A security?" "I know," Ross said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who outranked everyone in the building. "Stand down." "I can't do that." Ross leaned in just far enough to make his point without escalating. "You can, and you will." The man hesitated, his eyes flicking to Ava before he retreated, disappearing into the crowd. The watching staff pretended not to notice the exchange, but the tension in the room thickened until it felt hard to breathe. Mercer approached Ava, rubbing his hands together as though they were cold despite the hospital's overheated air. "That call you made earlier," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "About the right-sided presentation." Ava waited, giving him space to finish. "You were right," he admitted, the words clearly costing him something. "If we'd waited any longer for confirmation, he wouldn't be alive right now." Ava finished for him. Mercer nodded slowly, then seemed to struggle with something. "Why didn't you push harder? Insist?" Ava's expression didn't shift. "Because you wouldn't have listened." The simple truth of it landed harder than any accusation could have. Mercer looked away, something like shame crossing his features. Down the hall, the imaging tech's voice rang out. "We've got something here!" Ava and Ross moved in unison, reaching the viewing station as the scan populated on the screen. The image glowed in shades of gray and white, an injury pattern that would tell a clear story to anyone who knew how to read trauma properly. Ava saw it instantly, not just the physical damage, but the timing, the sequence of events written in bone and tissue. "This didn't happen here," she said. Ross nodded, already ahead of her. "He came in carrying it." "Then he wasn't running from something," Ava said, her mind piecing together the puzzle. "He was moving towards something, deliberately." "From where?" Ava stared at the image, reading between the lines of fractured ribs and internal bleeding. Somewhere he had no authorization to be. Ross's phone buzzed again. This time he answered, listening in absolute silence while his expression hardened, degree by degree. When he ended the call, his face had turned to stone. "They're activating containment protocols?" he said. "For a hospital?" Ava asked, though she already knew the answer. "For you," Ross replied, his voice careful, "and for whatever followed you through those doors." A chill moved through her, not fear exactly, but recognition, the feeling of pieces clicking into place. "This isn't about me," she said. Ross didn't argue because he knew she was right. The lights flickered again. This time they stayed dim for a full second before returning. Somewhere deep in the building, an elevator alarm chimed its warning, then abruptly cut off. Ava felt the shift in the air, the same subtle change she'd learned to recognize years ago, right before everything went loud and violent. She turned her attention to the ceiling, tracking vents, airflow patterns, the small details most people never thought to consider. "Who trained the system that flagged me?" she asked. Ross answered without hesitation. "You did." That stopped her cold. He continued, his voice dropping lower. "You helped design the identification protocols after Kandahar, the redundancies, the memory triggers, the safeguards for assets that couldn't be allowed to exist in any public database." Ava swallowed hard against the rising understanding. Those protocols were meant to protect people? They were, Ross agreed, until someone figured out how to weaponize them, how to wake them up. Another alarm sounded, much closer this time. A nurse sprinted past, panic bleeding through her professional composure. "ICU patient just crashed," she called out. Same presentation as before. Ava moved before Ross had finished processing the words. She reached the room in seconds, her mind already cycling through differentials and interventions. The pattern was unmistakable now, impossible to ignore. This wasn't random chance or bad luck. Someone was orchestrating this. She stabilized the patient with practiced efficiency, but it consumed more time than she was comfortable with. When she finally stepped back, Ross was watching her hands with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "They're testing you," he said. Ava wiped her palms on a towel, her movements deliberate. "They're testing the hospital's response systems. And the security infrastructure," Ross added. "If they can force escalation here, they can replicate it anywhere." Ava's mind was already racing ahead, mapping possibilities and countermeasures. "Then they'll push again," she said. "Harder this time." As if her words had summoned it, a shout echoed from the ER. A patient's cardiac monitor erupted in urgent alarm. Then another joined it. Then a third. Ava turned sharply. "How many?" Ross checked his phone, his face grim. 3 patients, different floors, simultaneous. Ava's chest tightened. "That's not coincidence." "No," Ross agreed quietly. "That's a message." They split without needing to discuss it. Ava moved through the hospital like she owned every corridor, stepping into chaos and quieting it with nothing more than her presence and competence. She caught the small things before they became catastrophic. The wrong medication stopped before it could be administered, the subtle respiratory distress no one else had noticed yet. Each intervention bought precious seconds, and seconds, she knew, could mean the difference between life and death. But with each save, she felt the pressure mounting. Mercer found her near the central nurses' station, his eyes too wide. "They're saying we might need to evacuate the entire building." Ava shook her head firmly. "You can't do that." "Why the hell not?" "Because that's exactly what they want you to do," she said, her voice cutting through his panic. "And because moving critical patients right now will kill more people than staying put." Mercer stared at her like he was seeing someone completely different. Who are they? Ava met his gaze directly. Someone who remembers me from before. Ross rejoined them, his expression carved from granite. We've confirmed external interference in hospital systems. From where? Mercer demanded. Ross didn't answer him. He looked only at Ava. They're close, physically close. Ava closed her eyes for half a second, centering herself the way she'd been trained. When she opened them, the room seemed sharper somehow, every sound crystal clear and distinct. Then stop reacting to their moves, she said. Start leading them where you want them to go. She led them into a service corridor that few people used anymore. The air noticeably cooler here, the mechanical hum different from the main hospital. She stopped near a sealed door, her hand resting lightly against the wall as though feeling for something. This section connects to the older infrastructure, she said, before they did the digital upgrades. Ross nodded slowly, understanding dawning. You're thinking they piggybacked on to the legacy systems. They didn't piggyback, Ava corrected, her voice certain. They seeded it, planted access points. A beat of silence. When? Days ago. Maybe weeks, she said. They needed me here tonight to complete whatever they're doing. Ross's jaw clenched. You were bait? Yes, Ava said. And so was he, the patient. A sharp crack echoed through the building, metal striking metal somewhere in the infrastructure. The lights flickered again, staying dim longer this time. Overhead, the intercom crackled to life. All units, stand by for full lockdown procedures. Ross's radio erupted with overlapping voices, each more urgent than the last. He listened for a moment, then looked at Ava, with something that might have been regret. They've initiated the final phase, he said. Ava's gaze lifted, steady and absolutely unflinching. Then we're out of time. The building shuddered, deeper and more ominous than before, as automated systems began sealing the hospital section by section. And somewhere in the darkness between floors, something finally broke through. The lockdown descended in waves. First came the doors, heavy steel barriers sliding into place with a sound that didn't belong in a place dedicated to healing. Then the lights dimmed to emergency strips running along the baseboards, bathing the corridors in an eerie red glow that made everything look like a scene from someone's nightmare. Elevators froze between floors, trapping people in metal boxes. The building itself didn't panic, but the people inside it did. Ava stood motionless in the service corridor, listening to the hospital transform around her. She felt it the way she used to read terrain in hostile territory, through vibration, through changes in air pressure, through the subtle delays between cause and effect. Somewhere 3 floors above them, an alarm failed to silence on its first cycle. Somewhere in the basement, a backup generator kicked in 2 seconds later than it should have. They're not testing anymore, Ross said quietly beside her. They're forcing a resolution. Ava didn't answer. She was counting. Seconds between each alarm. The precise order in which they triggered. The way sound traveled through walls and ductwork. Where does this corridor actually lead? Mercer asked, his voice stretched thin with tension. Supply storage, Ava said. Old wing, before they renovated and modernized. And beyond that? She looked at him directly. Nowhere you want to be during a systems failure. As if the universe wanted to prove her point. A crash echoed down the hallway, something heavy collapsing under its own weight. A shout followed, panicked and raw. Then another. Ross's radio exploded with overlapping voices, sharp with urgency and barely controlled fear. He listened for 5 seconds, then cut the channel entirely. They've compromised central supply, he said. Sick chemical storage area. Mercer's face went pale. That's not possible. The safeguards. Ava was already running. Nothing's impossible if you've been inside the architectural plans. They sprinted through corridors that blurred past. The air changed as they approached the old wing, growing thicker, taking on a metallic taste. Ava grabbed a respirator from a wall-mounted emergency unit and tossed one to Mercer without breaking stride. He fumbled with it, then managed to secure it across his face as he followed. Inside the supply room, chaos had already taken root. A ruptured storage crate. A chemical smell, sharp enough to make eyes water and throats burn. 2 orderlies were down, coughing violently, their eyes wide with the particular terror of not being able to breathe properly. Ava dropped to her knees beside them, moving with efficient precision, checking airways, repositioning bodies away from the spreading contamination. Seal the ventilation system, she commanded, her voice cutting through the confusion. Right now. A technician stood frozen, paralyzed by protocol. I don't have authorization to... Ross stepped into his line of sight. You do now. The vents whined shut with a pneumatic hiss. The room grew stiller, quieter, the air settling into something less immediately dangerous. Ava worked with focused intensity, administering oxygen, stabilizing vital signs, her movements precise despite the pressure building behind her eyes. Mercer watched, visibly stunned. You've dealt with this exact scenario before. Ava didn't look up from her patient. I've stopped worse than this. Ross crouched beside her, close enough that his next words wouldn't carry. We have confirmation, he said. External actors triggered this remotely. They wanted the hospital to fail catastrophically. And they wanted me to make an impossible choice, Ava said, understanding the full picture now. Yes, she finished with the orderlies and stood, wiping chemical residue from her gloves. They're still inside the system, right now. Ross nodded grimly. We're trying to trace the access point. Ava shook her head. You won't make it in time. They're too good. What are you suggesting? Ava met his gaze and then deliberately looked toward the old terminal mounted on the far wall. Obsolete equipment, rarely used, connected to legacy systems nobody thought mattered anymore. That console controls the manual overrides, Ross said slowly, following her logic. If we force a shutdown from there... You shut down the entire hospital, Ava finished, for approximately 3 minutes. Mercer stared at them both. People will die if we do that. Ava's voice softened with genuine compassion. More people will die if we don't. A beat stretched between them. Another alarm sounded somewhere distant, then cut off with suspicious abruptness. Ross made his decision. Do it! Ava crossed to the console. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard for half a second, not from doubt, but from the weight of memory. She began entering commands she hadn't used in 7 years, muscle memory filling the gaps where conscious thought couldn't reach. The screen flickered, lines of text scrolling too fast for anyone else to follow, too fast for anyone else to even attempt to stop her. The hospital went quiet, not silent. It was still alive, still breathing, but held, suspended. The alarms stopped mid-cry. The flickering lights steadied into something stable. The crushing pressure in the air eased like a fist slowly unclenching. Outside in the parking lot, the black SUVs continued idling, their engines providing a steady mechanical heartbeat against the surrounding night. Ross exhaled slowly. You just made powerful enemies. Ava didn't look away from the screen. I already had them. A voice crackled over Ross's radio, clearer now without the interference. We've lost external access points, it reported. They're pulling back from the network. Ava closed the terminal with a decisive keystroke. They'll try again, she said with certainty. Just not tonight. Mercer leaned heavily against a storage crate, his hands trembling. What exactly are you? Ava turned to face him. I'm the nurse who tried to warn you 3 hours ago. They made their way back through the hospital as systems rebooted in carefully controlled stages. Lights brightened section by section. Doors unlocked with audible clicks of releasing mechanisms. The ER began breathing again, staff emerging from wherever they'd taken shelter, confusion gradually giving way to cautious relief. The patient who had recognized her was awake now, his eyes tracking her movements as she approached his bedside. He swallowed with difficulty, his voice weak but clear. I knew you'd come through, he said. Ava checked his vitals with practiced efficiency, made a minor adjustment to his medication line. Rest now, she told him gently. You've done enough. He managed a faint smile. They always said you were the most stubborn person they'd ever met. She allowed herself a small smile in return. They were absolutely right. Ross watched from the doorway, his posture somehow both relaxed and alert. We'll need to talk. Debrief. Ava nodded once. After my shift ends. Mercer cleared his throat awkwardly. Ava, he said, uncertainty making him seem younger. I owe you an apology. And probably my career, and... She stopped him with a look that wasn't unkind. Take care of your patients, she said simply. That's more than enough. Outside, dawn crept across the sky in shades of pale gray and ordinary pink, the city waking up completely unaware of how close it had come to something catastrophic. The black SUVs remained in the parking lot, but their doors stayed closed now, their presence less threatening, more respectful. Ross walked with Ava toward the main entrance. "You could leave all this," he said quietly, carefully. "We could offer protection, resources, a completely clean slate and new identity." Ava paused to adjust the strap on her prosthetic leg, a gesture so casual it belied the significance of what it represented. "I already chose where I belong." He studied her face, reading the absolute certainty there, then nodded with understanding. "If you ever change your mind, I won't," she said, not unkindly but with finality. Inside, the ER hummed, with renewed purpose and energy. Nurses moved with restored confidence. Doctors spoke in lower, calmer tones. People glanced at Ava as she passed, not with fear, not with awe, but with something closer to genuine understanding and respect. She returned to her work. Hours later, when her shift finally ended and the next team had taken over, Ava stepped outside alone. The black SUVs were gone. The morning was quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. She breathed in the cool air and consciously let the tension drain from her shoulders, feeling each muscle release. She didn't disappear again. She turned around and went back inside. Because some people don't get the luxury of stopping being who they fundamentally are. They just choose again and again to show up anyway. If you stayed with Ava through this entire journey, if you felt the fear, the restraint, the quiet strength running underneath everything, please don't scroll away just yet. Subscribe. These stories only exist because you choose to listen, because you choose to stay and bear witness. If this mattered to you, even a little, stay with us. We need you here.